apes on horses! Do they have t-shirts yet? I'm pretty sure they have t-shirts. Hello everyone, David here with another movie review, and this time it is for, once again, another movie that I was really anticipating, really looking forward to, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I was a huge fan. I really enjoyed Rise of the Planet of the Apes back in 2011, so I was definitely looking forward to the sequel with the title that I believe should have been the title for the first one rather than the second one, because that always bugged me. I think the previous one should have been the Dawn, the beginning of Planet of the Apes, whereas this one should have been the Rise, considering that the whole focal point of this movie is the uprising of these apes taking over the planet. But nevertheless, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes has Caesar returning, leading his colony of apes, while these group of survivors, human survivors, manage to come and cross paths with Caesar and his followers, and a conflict arises that can lead to an all-out war. And that's one of the best things about this movie. They got it right when it came to selling the theme of duality, of how similar the humans and the apes are. Each faction has one of everything. You got the leader who wants peace and doesn't really want to fight, but if he has to, he will. You got someone who's artistic and loves to learn about new things, and you got an asshole. And I love how on the human side, who did they get to play the asshole? The asshole from The Walking Dead. This guy, man, Adam Scott and Joel McHale, you guys got competition, because this guy is amazing at playing an asshole, because from now on, that's all he's gonna play. I understand that he was in Band of Brothers, and I haven't seen Band of Brothers, I'm sorry, but I wouldn't be surprised if I do watch it, and it turns out that this guy is an asshole in that too. But aside from the asshole, the human element of this movie is actually pretty well done. You care about these characters, or at least the majority of these characters, and you understand where they're coming from. You understand why they feel the need to fight the apes, because the reasoning behind it and the logic behind it, it's kind of understandable. I was expecting them to do something where they're like, oh, you know, we got to take them out before they take us. You know, we got to fight them for no apparent reason, just because we don't want to live in this world of paranoia. Instead, they say, hey, there's this thing that we kind of need, and we're actually going to go ahead and try to do this pacifically at first, but if that doesn't work out, hey, we're pulling out the big guns, literally. And so they do a good job at making these human characters, or at least, like I said, the majority of these human characters, sympathetic and logical, without ever making us, the audience, feel like they need to lose and the apes need to kick these guys' asses. Now, with that being said, this movie does a good job at making apes kick asses really well, because one thing that this movie has over other movies like the Transformers franchise, and what people are speculating is going to be the case with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, is that they really do put the apes in the forefront rather than the humans, because as easy to connect as the story was for the human counterparts, it really is the ape story. All right, it's called Dawn of the Planet of the Apes for a reason. In fact, the first 20 or so minutes of this movie is nothing but the apes, and getting to know the apes, getting to know all these different characters, and making us feel for these characters, so that whenever something happens to them, you genuinely care. You genuinely feel stirred up whenever something happens, because they spend an awful lot of time with these apes, particularly Caesar, and seeing how much of a complex character he has become from the first movie, because at the end of the first one, we see that he has become, he is destined to be this leader for this tribe. It is in this one, after maybe I believe 10 years or so since the events of the first movie, where they really do a good job at showing that progression of Caesar and how he has risen to the status that he is in this tribe, where everybody is so loyal to him that even the hothead asshole of his tribe even has to recognize, and every now and again, that Caesar means business, and Caesar will make it known to him that he means business. And while on the subject of the characters for the apes, they did a good job at really singling out certain apes and give them characteristics to really separate them from one another, because at some point you're going to start to notice that certain apes look alike, and you're not going to know which one is which, but the ones that are most vital to the story, they do a good job at singling these apes out, like Maurice, who's the scholar of the group. He's an orangutan, and he was really cool. And you got Rocket, the gorilla, who's kind of like the muscle. He's like the bodyguard. And you also got Caesar's son. He also has a family in this movie, so that makes him a lot more sympathetic and easy to attach to. But of course, you cannot talk about the characters within the apes and not mention Koba. I'm going to go ahead and quote Jeremy Johns. He tweeted this some time ago after watching Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. He said that Koba is that racist uncle that instead of making family dinners awkward with his banter, he practically steals the scene. And he's correct. This guy is just a force to be reckoned with. And I love how they were able to make him so menacing, but at the same time, kind of see why he would have somewhat of an influence amongst this tribe. But man, he was menacing. He was truly intimidating, especially a particular scene where he's trying to fool somebody, and just the way he's acting. I really would like to know if the actor behind the performance for Koba was just like Andy Serkis's, where, you know, it was motion capture and voice. So I would really like to know what actor played him, because he did a magnificent job at making Koba very intimidating without being over the top or satirical, and being a genuine terror. And that's actually a tone that they managed to sprinkle here and there throughout the movie, especially during the latter half, where they really did give us the impression that these apes are going to rule over humanity. And we see moments of that towards the latter half of this movie, where we're going to see the future planet of the apes, the actual planet of the apes. Now, my only problem with this character, as menacing and as formidable of a foe as he was for Caesar, and how well characterized he was, my only problem with him is actually the same problem that I have with the movie as a whole, and that is that there are certain elements to his character, as well as the writing for the story of this movie, that I found to be somewhat familiar territory. There's certain things in the movie that you'll look at and be like, I've kind of seen that before, and with the character of Koba, let's just say that if you are a huge fan of The Lion King, you're going to feel right at home with Koba and his story and his role in this movie. Two things that remained consistent throughout the movie, for the better, were the visual effects. The apes still look fantastic, and I love that aside from Caesar, we also got these other apes with several characteristics to, like I said, single them out and to make them different from one another, at least the more important ones, because some of the chimps in the back, you can kind of tell that the visual effects artists kind of hit copy and paste a couple of times, but that's not to discredit the amazing work that they did on the design of these apes. Numerous moments, especially whenever they blended in with the cinematography of the shot, they looked amazing. They looked really realistic. And while on the subject of the cinematography, I think director Matt Reeves, who did Cloverfield and Let the Right One In, or Let Me In, I can't remember what it was titled, but it's a remake of a vampire movie from Sweden, or I can't remember, some foreign country. He knows how to shoot scenes and how to frame certain scenes and make them bigger than what they would entail, because this is a movie about chimps, and yet the scope for the movie felt really epic, especially during this shot. That's a tracking shot, and I wish it could have gone on longer to see what Reeves could have done with at a technical level, what he could have done with that shot. But it's like from the side of a tank, and it just keeps on rolling to see what happens during this battle, and it was a really cool shot. I really wish it could have gone on for a little bit longer, maybe 10-15 seconds longer, to see what else he could pull off. But I do remember him doing a similar kind of shot in that vampire movie, Let Me In, or Let the Right One In, where it was in the car and it stayed there. And I look forward to see what Reeves does next in terms of technical shots as well as cinematography. And I think he did a good job in this movie at really making the scope bigger than what it originally was. And like I said, the effects are very consistent throughout the entire movie, better than that shiny chrome that we got towards the end of Transformers 4. And the other consistent thing is pacing. I think that this is one of the most well-edited movies of the year so far. I know I haven't seen as many movies as movie critics do, but this movie is 2 hours long, and I thought it was over before I knew it. Towards the end of the movie, I was actually thinking to myself, I really want to see what happens next, and then it cuts to black, and I'm like, oh, it's over. Now, as much as I enjoyed the movie, it's not without its problems. I already mentioned the fact that it does have some familiar territory here and there that we've seen in other movies, especially with the character of Koba. But while I do have other nitpicks, there aren't that very frequent. One would be that a certain character drops a rather significant fact about why these humans are no longer, I'm trying to avoid spoilers, especially from the first movie, but a character mentions something rather important about why these apes are rising and why humans are kind of sort of not around. And I would have loved for them to have explained that in much better detail, but instead they mention it once and then it disappears and they never mention it again. I really wish that they would have gone back to that. And Gary Oldman, everybody in the cast did a great job, including Gary Oldman. Gary Oldman was really good. But if you're going to cast Gary Oldman in a role, you know, it's Gary Oldman. Give him some more screen time, because I think he was on set for like a day or two for this movie, and then poof, he was gone because he's barely in the movie. And something happens with his character towards the end. I'm not going to go into detail, but it kind of reminded me an awful lot of Willem Dafoe's character in Beyond Two Souls, where he was very cohesive throughout the entire movie, or at least for the time that he was on film. But then something comes later on towards the end in terms of his character where I'm like, that was kind of extreme. Why did that just happen? I think maybe if we had seen more of this character, we would have understood why that thing happened, but because we didn't, it kind of came out of left field. But this is definitely a movie that gives you a darker tone and much more content than the original that we would have loved to have seen in that original movie, but I'm glad that they saved up for the sequel. You care an awful lot more about the human characters, but more to the point, they really fleshed out what the apes are capable of after the events of the first movie. And man, I never thought I can feel for a CG character. And when you got Andy Serkis playing that CG character of Caesar, you're in for a really well-made movie. And for that, I'll go ahead and give Dawn of the Planet of the Apes a 9 out of 10. But it's a low 9 out of 10. It barely gets by into that scale. Because, like I said, I wish they could have changed up some of the things that were a little bit too familiar from other movies that we've seen before. And if they could have just had polished up those tiny little nitpicks that I have with the movie, I would have felt better about giving it a 9. But I will go ahead and pass it as a 9 out of 10. But I will tell you, it's a low 9 out of 10. It is better than the first one, but only by a smidget, like half of a point. But as much as I really like this movie, I feel the need to say that this is one of those movies that fall into the category of having like one of the worst F-bombs in a PG-13 movie ever. I mean, it's like right up there with Titanic. I'm like, come on, you gotta make it a bomb. That's why they call it an F-bomb. But be sure to let me know what you guys thought of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes if you have seen it, and I'll see you guys next time. I'm gonna go have a Caesar salad.